I thought I'll break it down, what discipline is, what intuition is, and then we'll have a little like discussion afterwards. They kind of conflict each other a little bit sometimes. So I am like, which is better? Which principle do I follow to get the results that I want? Hello, guys. Welcome back to the Extremely Well podcast. We are doing something a little bit different today. So, usually I have someone else sitting in that seat and we do an interview, but I'm recording a solo episode today. So, we'll see how we go with it. I'm really curious to get your feedback on it. It is all about discipline versus intuition. This is something that I've been pondering for a little while. I've been reading about it. I've been journaling about it. I've been meditating on it. Podcast, anything that I can get my hands on, I'm kind of digesting and thinking about it. This piece is strictly opinion. So I'm not a doctor. So there's no medical scientific research. Maybe in some of the books and the podcasts that I've listened to, there have been, but I don't check the articles. I kind of just go off what I think, what I feel, what I take in and what I don't. So this is purely me discussing and reflecting on those things that I've learned and what has and hasn't been working for me. This has been something that I actually think has been slowly taking place for many, many, many years. However, I think like it's come to like a head recently for me in my personal life. And it's, something that I felt that I wanted to sit down and write about. I was actually recently journaling about this and I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much to dissect here and I want to talk to people about this. So I was like, you know what, why don't I speak to the podcast about this and see where we go? So I often come to moments in my life where I am reflecting on where I'm currently at versus where I want to be. And they're quite different, or I perceive that there's quite a gap within that. So I know in order to achieve or to close that gap, different actions need to be made or done in order for me to achieve that goal or to be where I want to be. And I often think about what is the best way to get me there as well, like long term. So if you look on social media and you look on podcasts, books, and they will often talk about either discipline or they'll talk about intuition and how you can incorporate those. I think there's so much great material out there for each of those. So discipline especially, there's so many great podcasts. There's just so much out there. It's a really like hot topic, I think, with humans being obsessed with productivity and all those things. Discipline, there's so much out there. Intuition, I also think there's like more and more coming out in that space, especially as people are starting to look at spirituality, emotional intelligence, and all of that as well. I think intuition has a really strong place. They kind of conflict each other a little bit sometimes. So I am like, which is better? Which principle do I follow to get the results that I want? There is context around this for me, and where this has really come to a head for me recently is in regards to moving my body in terms of training and extreme sports. It's something that I haven't been doing as much as I want to be doing. It's something that I love to do and I've always loved to do, but I often find myself in this cycle where I get stagnant and I guess this is where like that gap comes into place. So where I currently am is I'm not moving my body as much as I would like to. I feel that in my body, that stagnant energy, and I want to be moving more frequently for my health and things like that. So I want to break that down and then discuss it further. But that's the context, I guess, or the background as to why this has come to a head for me, because I think that's important to know, because I think context can be important. So I thought I'll break it down, what discipline is, what intuition is, and then we'll have a little like discussion afterwards. And I don't even know what they call it, I guess my results or how it manifests or how our actions, I guess, on that. So discipline, there's many different definitions of discipline. However, what we're talking about today is behavioral control. So that might be through a structure, through a set of rules, and it implies control, it implies order and adherence as well. So we're talking about self-discipline, so controlling our own behavior, self-behavior, not other people's behavior. So we're not trying to control other people or anything like that. This isn't like a parenting thing, or because I think that's where like discipline of others sort of comes into, is like parenting. However, I am curious because I do believe that there is a link here between how you self-discipline and how you discipline others in a parental sense. But I think that's a whole other episode, maybe not on this podcast, but I also like parenting books and things like that for my own accord. So let's put that aside. We're talking about self-discipline today. So how we speak to ourselves and how we can control and work with our own behavior. So I think the need for discipline and self-discipline and controlling our own behavior comes from a place of, it stems from our values. So we have certain values that we uphold in this life, and it's how we want to be living our life. So these are individual to everyone. And I think whether it's conscious or subconscious, we're always taking action on these values and doing things necessarily we don't want to do as well, which usually in my mind, I think it's like holds less value than what that main value is. So discipline is taking action towards or because of a certain value that we hold, and maybe sacrificing or not doing other things or other actions that hold a lesser value to us. So, for example, you might hold the value of travel. So you may, really value life experiences. You may value new experiences. You may value newness, changing it up, looking for other places to go. So travel is something that you value a lot in this life. So you may save up your money, so you might increase your income by working more than what you would like to perhaps, and then also decrease your spending. So you might spend less on, say, eating out or buying new clothes because they don't hold as much value towards yourself as, say, travel does. So that's kind of an example of why I think values are really important when it comes to discipline Discipline is great for consistency. So discipline allows you to establish routine and habits. It can keep you on track. It allows you to be able to show up when you don't necessarily feel like it, it's not your vibe today. So you're relying on a system rather than on your feelings. It's great for resilience. So you persevere through obstacles, challenges, or setbacks. It's also great for long-term goals. So helping you make choices or sacrifices in that present moment for a future reward, or I guess they call that delayed gratification as well. So going without or sacrificing something in the short term to have an even greater return in the long term. What discipline is not so great for is rigidity. So sometimes if you're really disciplined, you might become inflexible, making it hard to adapt to these challenges that come up. There may also be changing circumstances or an alternative perspective that might be really helpful in order to achieve that goal. And if you're really disciplined, sometimes you may not have that space to change course or to move in another direction even if that course is beneficial to you as well. It's also not great for burnout, or it can lead to burnout. If you're too disciplined, you may dismiss your need for rest or relaxation or that downtime that you need to recharge and give you energy. You may then suffer from physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion as well from just too much discipline. It also can stifle creativity as well. So if your structure is too strict, there's no room for thoughts. It can stop you from exploring and creating something different, because that often innovation comes from trialing things over and over and over again. There isn't often like a one way to get something done, and you do it and that's done. So there's so many different options that you can do. So it can stifle that creativity because you're often taking that action without much room for thought as well. So that is discipline in a nutshell. We then have intuition, which is on the other side. So intuition is a cognitive process, which is where you tune into your inner feelings or your emotions. It's kind of like a lot of people explain it as that inner feeling or that gut feeling. Sometimes you don't know where it comes from and it can happen whenever, but it does pop up and you kind of have this like inner knowing or this sense of what is the best path for you. It is an innate ability, so you may understand something instinctively without any conscious reasoning whatsoever. It's, I guess, linked to that inner knowing. It can provide insights and understanding about a situation, a decision, a problem, and it can draw from implicit knowledge as well, or information that you may not be consciously aware of. It is subjective, so it varies greatly depending on person to person. So it's influenced by individual experiences, biases, and emotional states. If you're really angry one day, then your intuition may react differently to if you're really happy the next day or even within 5 minutes of each other. Different experiences that can happen in life, so past traumas, things like that, great experiences that we've had. I think some people often will be like, you would be like, oh, like so-and-so, that person's great. Like they're such a legend, where someone else might be like, I don't think so. So their intuition is different towards a certain person or their opinion on that person. So that's where it can be subjective and it can change depending on the person. So it's an individual thing rather than something that we collectively feel. Intuition, what it is great for is it aligns you with your values. So it helps guide you towards a pursuit that you really want to be doing. It aligns you with your deep values and your passions. It includes following intuitive impulses, which leads to fulfillment and intrinsic motivation. So that motivation that is like pure and raw and it just gets you going. Creativity and inspiration. So it can help spark creative and innovative ideas, and it's highly motivating as well. It also is really great for the flow state as well. So it helps contribute to the experience of flow state. For anyone that doesn't quite know what that means, it's something that is, especially in extreme sports, really important, and it's kind of that thing that everyone follows or chases with extreme sports. And it's when you're in you're fully immersed in that activity or that thing that you're doing or that action, and you completely lose track of time, of other thoughts. It's just you and you're doing that. It's like pure mindfulness, I guess you could say. There's a really great book on that. I will link it in the description because I cannot think of it. I think it might even just be called Flow State, but it's such a great book, and I'll link it in my show notes as well. And it helps you to allow to have those impulses and act rather than trying to force it. So intuition is like, oh, I want to do this thing, or oh, I want to go ride bikes. If you can go do it in that moment, then you're going to become much closer to that flow state. Intuition is not so great for subjectivity. So it's inherently subjective and it is influenced by biases, emotions, and personal experiences. So decisions made can be skewed depending on that. So for example, you might be, when you're young or at any point, you may be bitten by a dog, right? So from that experience, your intuition, whenever you're around a dog, is screaming at you and it's saying, this is not safe, get out of here, run, flight, fight, response, let's get out of here, because you can't trust those dogs. And so that intuition is guiding that. So it's something that you can't necessarily control. There's also unreliability as well. So this kind of follows on from subjectivity as well, but it can be unreliable due to those past experiences, emotions, and biases. Another example of this is for people that have a period or bleed, or a menstrual cycle, your cycle changes throughout the month. So I know for myself, when I'm ovulating, I'm like, yep. Everything is good. My brain is super open. I'm so open to conversation. I'm open to thought. I'm open to new experiences. Whereas when I am, in my luteal phase or bleeding, I'm really quite closed. I want to stay inward. I view my body differently. The way I view my body may not be as positive during that ovulation phase. It might be more negative. So I guess that example of unreliability is like, for example, that cycle. My intuition is going to change throughout that cycle depending on where I am, and that's out of my control. It's also not great for impulsivity as well. So if you rely heavily on intuition without logic reasoning behind something, and I guess considering those consequences or gathering the sufficient info, you may make an impulsive decision which may be detrimental to yourself in the long run. So that might be, your car breaks down, or your car breaks down and you're like, yep, you know what, I'm over this. I'm going to go buy myself a new car. You don't really think it through. You buy the new car, maybe, it's like 20 grand, 20, 30 grand versus if you're like, you know what, I could have just gotten it fixed. Then it could have been $1,000 or $2,000. So it's like little things like that sometimes you do need that logical reasoning rather than just the intuition piece to help you not make, I guess, detrimental decisions in that long run. So that's a little bit about intuition and also discipline as well, to give you guys each a snapshot on how I kind of define it, some words and pros and cons for each of them. So the way I like to view intuition and discipline and like sort of when to use it, I think that I look at it as yin and yang, or I look at it as the masculine and feminine energy. So I look at discipline is that yang or that masculine energy, and I look at intuition as the yin and the female energy. So this has nothing to do with gender as well. I want to make that really clear. It is an energy. We all hold masculine and feminine or yin and yang energies within us. So I just want to make that really clear about that. But I guess within that, one cannot be healthy without the other. So if one is more present, for example, discipline is more present than intuition, then it's not going to be balanced and it may not be as sustainable in the long run. When you look at a yin and yang symbol, when you envision it, the yang is white with a small black dot inside it. The yin is black with a small white dot within it. So the meaning of that symbol is you can only have one and that a little bit of the other side must be present, or the opposite side, in order to create a synergy or a balance. So I think I guess that brings me to my conclusion of where I've landed with it upon my own reflection, and that is there has to be a balance of both. So I hear so much online, and I think it's like all to do with marketing and things like that, but there's so much about discipline, and it's like 4 ways to be more disciplined. And I think those resources can be so yin or so yang, or so masculine and so feminine. And I think that maybe if you're someone that has lots of, like discipline already in your life, or you work in a masculine way, perhaps adding discipline may not be the answer. Perhaps it is actually to balance those energies. It may be adding that intuition to the piece. So something that I often, or what I have reflected on, is that there's not often the conversation of discipline and intuition in the same resource. It's you want more discipline or you want more intuition, and the conversation isn't there between the two. So I think there's also, I must say as well, that there is a lot on intuition as well, and that feminine energy. And I think sometimes, and which is where I have fallen more recently, and I think there's so much gold in that, but I think it also is really easy to get stuck in that place, and you may not be able to make action from that as well. So I think it's really important to have that healthy balance of both. And I think it's important to have the conversation at the same time as well. It's not just about how I be more disciplined with my training or how I be more disciplined with my writing and things like that. It's also about your intuition and how you're feeling and your gut feeling when you're doing the thing. So I often forget that there is a place for both of them in the one instance. So I try to lean naturally. I lean towards being more disciplined, and I often, forget that it's not just about being more disciplined. It's actually, well, how can I integrate both of them at the same time? And I think that's really important to decipher as well and to make clear. It is not a fixed state, and it is context dependent. So you can oscillate between the two, and it depends on what that situation is. So in certain situations, you may rely more heavily on that discipline, and in certain situations, you might rely more heavily on your intuition as well. I've got an example here. I've actually got it written down. So if you are feeling sick and you can't get out of bed, you rely on your intuition to call in sick for work, because your body needs that rest and it needs to stop. And sometimes that logic, you're like, you know what, I've got to put that aside because my body is screaming at me, i.e. I can't get out of bed. If you aren't feeling your best, or maybe you're not motivated to go to work, you'll use discipline to get yourself there. So you'll go, you know what, I know I'm not feeling the best. However, I have to get to work because I need to make money to put food on the table and to pay my rent, that kind of stuff. I'm going to break it down into the system that I've been following, and I found it so helpful lately within these steps. So I believe that it starts with intuition. So it's getting really clear on your values and your why. I was listening to a podcast recently about on the Mindset Mentor, and he was talking all about like the power of the why. And he was talking about that what do you think is the chance, or the percentage chance, or the percentage of you going out and making $1 million this year? And I think it was like people put their hands up, and it was like 0.01%, 2%. And I think there was a really optimistic person that he said that was like 5% put his hand up, or their hand up. And then he asked another question afterwards and said, if you had to make $1 million this year, and if you didn't, then all your family and loved ones all die, what do you think the chances are that you'd make $1 million? And people then were like 99%, 100%, or the high percentages, because the motivation or the why had completely shifted. And the other value, which was death of all your loved ones, was enough of a motivator to, you're going to make that happen. And that is the only thing that changed, because a minute ago they were saying that, what's your chances? And then when you added in something, which was, that you didn't really, something you didn't really want to happen, that then people were like, yep, I'll be able to make $1 million. And they were more motivated to do so. So I think the why and coming back to your values is so important. And I think that's like what I think when it's like your inner compass. It's like, well, why do you want to be disciplined, and why do you want to do that thing? Why, like for example, with me, why do I want to move my body? Why do I want to, be healthy? Things like that. So I think it starts with the intuition, and you got to get really clear on your values. And I think that has to come from within you. It can't come from external or from what people think of you, what society say you should do, what a podcast says you should do. I think it's really important for you to get really clear on that for yourself. So next comes the framework after that. So you've got your value, and then you create like a structure or a plan after that. You use logic to break it down, and you want to make sure it's realistic and doable as well. So you don't want to start training and you go, you know what, I'm going to train for 2 hours every day, because that's just not achievable. So it might look a little bit different to that, but I think you need to be really honest with yourself as to what that it looks like for yourself. So I like to use my calendar and plan it all out. You're then going to go and you're going to follow that plan, right? And you're going to use discipline to follow that plan, and make sure you stay on it, and you show up, and you remain accountable. So you're following that plan, all is good. All of a sudden a challenge arises, all right? That thing comes up that usually knocks you off that bandwagon. We all know the bandwagon. if I was actually listening to another podcast, I told you guys that I went deep on this. I listened to another podcast on Diary of a CEO with Ryan Holiday, and he spoke about the bandwagon, and he spoke about how it doesn't stop. It keeps rolling, and you have a choice whether you get on it or you let it go, so it keeps on rolling. So this is where I think the balance is kind of the most important part. So how can you listen to how you're feeling during that challenge? I think that's really important to go, you know what am I feeling right now? And like, why is this coming up? While you're tuning into how you're feeling, you can also do what is best for you in terms of your value. So using that discipline, so use your intuition to go, how am I feeling? How's this making me feel? How am I feeling today in order to achieve that goal that I have? And then also using the discipline to go, this is in line with me. This is what I want to be doing. So what is best for you in line with that value? Intuition may help you realize the speed of that wagon is maybe going too fast for you today, or too fast for you. Discipline helps you to keep up with that bandwagon. Intuition helps you to creatively think about how you can maximize your ability to keep up with that bandwagon. So again, talking about that creative thought. And then discipline can help you plan how we can improve for next time to ensure that we're maybe doing even better to keep up with that bandwagon and to keep yourself accountable, which I think is like really important. And it's kind of like I said before, you're oscillating between the two. After that, so after the challenge arises and you've moved past the challenge, I think there is a reflection for next time as well. This is where I think a lot of people talk about failure, and you're not failing if you get back on that bandwagon, if you keep going. And I think it's really important to think about why didn't this work? How can I work with that challenge that came up and push through it again? So using your intuition to reflect on the challenge and why it was challenging for you, and also to use discipline to hold yourself accountable and to show up again and make sure you do show up next time as well. So again, you're using a balance and you're using both in order to achieve long-term goals. And then that cycle begins again. Perhaps your value, or maybe you skip the value piece because we've already established that, but you go back to, okay, new structure. What does that look like? And then move on from there. So what does this look like in the real world? Because I think it's like really easy to talk about, but often something that I do for my learning and growth is whenever I'm listening to podcasts or listening to these things, and even when I'm writing this, I'm like, okay, this is all good and well to have examples, but like, what does it actually look like for myself? So I'm going to give you an example of what actually I did recently to help me, and that is in my training and movement program. So this is where like all these thoughts have come from, and anything I've spoken about, I've kind of ran it through this scenario. So something that this all happened actually, I hurt my shoulder last year, and I was like, you know what? I really want my health, and I really want longevity. I want to feel good within my body. I want to feel space. I want to make sure that I can go. If someone invites me to go snowboarding or someone invites me to go riding, I'm not like, oh, I'm not fit enough or I can't do that. I want to be like, no, yeah, I feel good. Like I've got space to go and do that. And also to prevent injury as well. So from that, and this is all while I was lying down, so I kind of could only really use my intuition, but I was stuck on the couch and I was like, you know what, I'm going to build up a structure and I'm going to make something happen. And so what I wrote out was, you know what, I want to strength train 3 times per week, and I'm going to do cardio 2 times per week as well. So strength training, I was like, you know what, when am I going to do that? When am I going to fit it in? Monday, Wednesday, Friday was where I landed, because if I was to do, say, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, I was like, I'm going to be too knackered. And then I was like, well, where does my cardio fit in? And maybe it's Tuesday and Thursday, for example. So that's my structure that I put in place. I work with a calendar that's fully color coded. So I created a new color, and that was where all my movement was going to come in. So when I look at it visually, I know that these days I want to see that color at least every day, or about 5 days a week was my goal, and I would be so stoked with that. So that's like, I guess, the structure that I put in place for me. Now, I also thought about challenges, but this is also what has come up for me since then as well. So challenges that came up: active job. Some weeks I am riding lots of kilometers up hills on bikes, right? And I can't avoid that. So working at camp, high schoolers are different to primary schoolers even. So the work is fluctuating completely. I also do have multiple jobs, so I do some freelancing and things like that on the side. So it's also like I might be switching between jobs. I might be traveling for work, that kind of stuff. So my work can fluctuate quite a bit in a week. My cycle as well. If you bleed, if you have a menstrual cycle, then you know that your cycle is going to change depending on where you are in that cycle. So how you train when you're ovulating is very different to how you train when you're bleeding or you're in even your luteal phase. So I had to be really mindful of, like, I guess, what that might look like at all different stages of my cycle as well. Because sometimes it can also be counterintuitive as well for me to train really heavily every single training session throughout the whole month. I also had in there sickness. So often I'm gluten-free and I'm very sensitive to gluten. So when I do eat it, I can get really sick, and sometimes, depending on how much I eat, it can wipe me out for long periods of time. So sometimes if I am exposed to gluten or I get sick or something happens that is going to affect that, and that might be a challenge as well. Something that is specific to me is I find it's sometimes really hard to find that bandwagon again and get back onto it after a gluten sensitivity, because it's like gut hormone, it's holistic. Same with getting sick. After Rona, I think it took me a good while, and, many athletes still struggle with their recovery, and friends of mine, family I know, long COVID, things like that, it's completely changed for them. So I think some of the questions in that moment is, how can I continue to train if and when these challenges arise? Perhaps it's, walking instead of sprinting for cardio. I love sprints. I'm not a jogger, so I haven't put that in there. But sometimes it might look like walking, or sometimes it might look like, I just go for like a mellow bike ride or something like that as well. It also might be Pilates or yoga instead of a heavy weight session. So I'm still training and I'm still being disciplined and I'm still showing up, but sometimes it's going to look slightly different depending on what my intuition is telling me. Sometimes it is also accepting that missing a day or missing a couple of days, or even, when you're really sick, missing a week is okay. It happens. If you were to go travel, you're going to miss a week or two or however long you're away for, and you can't train in that period. It's okay to miss those certain things, and it's no point beating yourself up afterwards as well. So really important. It's like, I missed the day, if I have really painful cycles or bleeds. So there is I'm not going to work on that day, let alone am I going to train. I just struggle to get out of bed. So for me, expecting myself to do a heavy weights training on day one of my cycle, it's just never going to happen. So, what might that look like for me? To be honest, it might look like, if I'm okay, going for like a really slow walk. It might look like, I'm just going to stretch in bed. And that's okay, because I'm still showing up and I'm still trying to be consistent. But it is okay to just, this whole training program on days where I'm in struggle street, they're going to go out the window. Same for injury, things like that. Reflection. So if I find myself in a position where the challenge really sets me back and it's been a month or two, and, and I go, I haven't trained, or I haven't been mindful within my training. Do I need to make tweaks to my structure? Do I need to change my I guess, like expectation on, is 3 times strength training too much? Recently, what I did was, because I was really active at work, and I was like, you know what? If I do like a leg day and an arm day and then a full body day, I get really sore and I struggle. So maybe what I need to do, and then I often skip maybe 1 session during the week or 2 sessions during the week. What I need to do instead is maybe just have one program. It's a full body workout, and I do that twice a week. I know what I need to do. I go in there, I get it done, and I move out. And that was so helpful, making that tweak for me. And I've actually gone back to that other split, which is I do full body and then I do lower body and then I do upper body as well. And what that might look like as well during the session, or like if for example, I'm like riding bikes all day at work, I'm probably not going to do a leg session that night or the day before. What it might look like is I might change my upper body and my lower body and just flip them around. And that's okay, because I'm using my intuition and I'm still using discipline, because I know that I'm still going to train those 3 days, rather than being like, you know what, I'm not going to, using my intuition to not train whatsoever and go, no, you know what, I need a rest. Or it might be too disciplined and I'm like, you know what, I'm going to smash out this legs. It doesn't matter. I've got to look after my task, or I've got to stay on track. And then the next day I'm at work and I can't ride my bike, or I can't get up the hill, or whatever, So I think it's really important, like, to reflect on the tweaks you need to make, and they can actually be really helpful. Sometimes taking a step sideways is fine, and continuing on is also fine as well. Also, double checking, does this still align with my value? Or if you're maybe falling off the bandwagon and you can't get back on the bandwagon, maybe it's conflicting with another value that you hold. For example, I really want to travel, but I just, for me, saving money towards a house is more important right now. That is where your values are conflicting, and there might be issues within that. And sometimes you might need to sit down and you might need to restructure what's happening or relook at those values as well. So it's really important to keep thinking about your values as well. So what does this look like in terms of extreme sports? Because we do talk about extreme sports and well-being, and I think they go hand in hand. So I'm going to give you an example of something that happened over the new year. So every time I go to Threadbow, we book it like so far in advance. My partner he gets so excited. He books these trips and he's like, yep, let's go. And I'm like, sweet, let's go. When the timing is rolling around and I'm like, oh shit, that's when my bleed's coming. You know what? We're camping, we're in a tent. I'm going to have my day one, and that's like not a good day for me to like not be at home. Anyway, we had a trip planned over the new year, and I was coming in, so I was luteal coming into my bleed of my cycle. So, sometimes you have like a trip planned and something pops up, such as your cycle, which for me is like a challenge that I know that can sometimes knock me off the bandwagon. Instead of me cancelling that trip and going, you know what, I'm not going to be in a good headspace, it's probably not the best thing for me to do with my bleed. I'm going to go, you know what, I'm still going to show up. I've booked shuttle passes forever ago. I've already spent so much money on this trip and I haven't even gotten there yet. But you know what I'm going to do? I am going to show up. I'm still going to ride my bike. You know what? Even if I ride for like 3 hours of that day, that's incredible. Rather than me just not going at all, or staying back at the campsite or snuggling up in the van. I can still turn up. I can ride the green and the blues if I like. Today is not a day for cannonball. This is not a cannonball trip. I'm not pushing myself. I'm not going down black runs, things like that. This trip is like, and I guess I shift my intention. So I might go, you know what, I'm going to not do anything risky. I'm just going to have fun. That's it. This isn't a trip to push myself. This is a trip to have fun. Perhaps if you are ovulating on that trip, that's when you might go, you know what, I'm going to push myself today, and I may sacrifice fun a little bit because you want to do that. So this is where I think your intuition as well as your discipline comes in. So you might go, you know what, I'm feeling like trash because of your cycle, because you're getting sick. Maybe you were sick the week before. Maybe you had a massive week of work and you're just exhausted. Sometimes just going, you know what, I'm going to do what I can. How can we get there? It's using your intuition, being disciplined. I'm still going to show up, using your intuition again. Okay, creatively thinking about how can we make this work and what's actually going to work for me? How can I get my needs met? And then also using your discipline to then go and do that thing. Going, you know what, Mel Robbins, I think it is, 3, 2, 1. Let's go. Actually, I don't think that's Mel Robbins, so don't quote me on that. But there's someone out there. I'll also link it in my show notes. I'm really good at remembering the thing, but I'm not good at remembering who said it. Same with music. I can remember the song, can't remember the artist, but I'll put it in my show notes. But there's someone that says, you know, you count down from 3 or 5 and you go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and you do the thing. So I think the discipline is really important, but it's not going, you know what, I've paid all this money for this trip. My expectation is that I'm going to ride 8 hours a day. You get up early, you ride and you push yourself because you're probably going to fall into a puddle at the end of the day, realistically. Or maybe you have this trip planned, you push yourself, you smash coffees and all that kind of stuff to get you through the trip, Red Bull, all of that. And then once the trip is done and you come home, you're knackered and you fall into a puddle and you have a crap week at work or something happens. So this is what I mean when I say sustainable goal setting, because I think if you're pushing yourself really hard all the time, other parts of your life are going to slip away. Maybe your sleep will be deprived. Maybe your work will go more downhill. So it's all about prioritizing and prioritizing certain values as well. So in extreme sports, I think it's about, being disciplined, still showing up, still going for that ride. You said you were going to meet a friend for a surf. You still go and you do your best to get in the water. It might look like sitting on the side for a little bit because you're listening to your intuition as well. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to have just as much fun, because I assume you're doing extreme sports for fun, or maybe you're an athlete, you're doing it for work as well. You know, sometimes you've got to like pull your socks up and go, and it might just look a little bit different to what you thought. So something else I want to add as well is I think there is something to be said on discipline and intuition and goal setting, on acceptance and self-love as well. So I think it's really important how we talk to ourselves and that we allow room for acceptance and failure in this process as well. I think like it's about thinking, well, what is the motivation behind your value even? So it's like going back another step. What is the motivation behind your value? So for example, if you are fearful of something or feel shame around a certain habit, and then you try to control it with discipline, you may be negating your intuition in that, and even shutting it off completely, and you're not checking in with yourself. You're not listening to how you're feeling, which from personal experience is not sustainable long term, because I believe that it can manifest up through your health, it'll pop up in other ways, and the universe or life will try to teach you that lesson as well. So I think it's really important to accept that fear or whatever that habit is, sit with your intuition or sit with yourself and your feelings, your gut feeling, and figure out what you're actually needing in that moment. Because when there's something with fear, I think you need to meet it with acceptance and go, okay, I hear you. I know that there is fear there. What do you need? Or like, how can I help you in this? For example, with like training, it might be you're fearful of losing fitness or something like that, you know? And I think it's like, why? What is underneath that? Because there will be a core thing that's even deeper than that. And it's what you're actually needing in that instance, and it may not be discipline or pushing yourself further. You may figure out the actions needed a completely different direction than what you're currently doing. So it might be that, say, bring it back to the health and stuff, you know, if your value is health and you're pushing yourself to be healthy, sometimes you may jeopardize your health by being too disciplined, when you actually need is to just go and rest, sleep as much as you possibly can, and just accept that that is what your body needs right now. And that may actually put you in a better position to then come back and work out than trying to push through and just keep going as well. So I think there has to be acceptance that as humans, like, we aren't perfect, and what our path looks like for ourselves isn't the same as the person next to us. And I don't think there is a perfect path as well. I think it's always about learning, and it's always about, trying. Like, sometimes you might go down a path and there might be a dead end, or it might not feel quite right. So how can we then, move over a little bit as well and try change our perspective and try and change where we thought we were going. And I think that is like part of life, and that's where you end up on the right track eventually. And I think self-talk is really important on that note as well. I like to think of it as, if you wouldn't say it to a friend, then you wouldn't say it to yourself either. And there has to be grace, and there has to be understanding and acceptance. I think this is where like that parenting thing that I mentioned earlier comes in. It's like, if you wouldn't say that to a young child or your younger self, then like, don't say it to yourself now, because just because you're older, doesn't change. You want to have positive self-talk, and you want to believe in yourself as well. So I just wanted to end too on a note that there is always a choice being made, whether you are leaning more into discipline or you are leaning more into intuition. There is always a choice. So even when you're being extremely disciplined, like, you are making that choice to be disciplined and to not look at your intuition. If you are purely leaning into your intuition, you probably know that choices are being made, but you don't always have to let your body guide everything as well, because it may not know best all the time in certain situations. So I often forget this. I often forget that you're always making a choice. My default is black and white thinking. I'm the queen of black and white thinking. So I think that to keep reminding yourself that there's always being a choice being made, and it's like, okay, well, what choice am I making right now? It's about having like a logical conversation with yourself, even if your intuition is really strong. Sometimes you need that logic because of those past experiences or that trauma. If that intuition is really strong, it doesn't mean you're not listening to it. It's just meaning that you're bringing in some logical thought, and that is what is best for the long run as well. So it may not be in that moment. It may also be for the long run as well. Sometimes you need to sit with that really strong intuition in that moment to then move past it and to move into something that's beneficial for the long-term goal. Something that I like this is how I view it, and it's something that I've done a couple of times, but pretend you're in a boardroom and your consciousness is there, and that's the mediator, alrighty? Your logical brain and your disciplined brain is there, and then your intuition are there too, and they're having a discussion together. So you're there to mediate, you're like the judge, and then the intuition piece and your discipline side, your logical side are there as well. And you want to make sure that you're making a decision based on the balance of both of them, and you hear both sides before making that decisions. Balancing both, and I think moving forwards using both discipline and intuition, is an art that takes so much time to develop as well. I don't think it just happens overnight and you go, you know what, yep, balance this and that. I think there's so much trial and error has to happen, and you have to sometimes lean too much into that discipline to go, oh, hang on, this isn't working. Sometimes when you lean too much into your intuition, it also doesn't work as well. And then I think it's like about finding that, the flow between the two. You're finding that flow state between the two, because I think they're both so important, and it's also part of the human experience as well. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. If you agree or disagree with anything I've said, let us know. We've got comments below. We've got comments on Instagram. We've got a Facebook page as well that we can discuss this further in. If you don't want the whole world seeing it, it's actually a private group. I'd love to hear more from you, what you think. If there's anything else that you want me to discuss, maybe in a future solo episode, let me know. But thank you so much. If you've made it here, you've listened to the whole thing. So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Hello. If you are watching this, it means you've made it to the end of the podcast. And I'm so blessed that you've chosen to spend the time here with us at Extremely Well. If you liked what you saw here today, and I'm hoping you did if you're here at the end, can you please hit that subscribe button, hit the follow, leave a review, tell us what you liked, what you didn't like. This is all for you. So we want to make sure that we are serving the community in the best way that we can. If you want to connect with us through our other channels, I'll leave them down below in the description box, and I can't wait to connect with you next time. I did it. I got through the end.